The sky had gone the color of old iron, heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen, but promised it would. The wind sighed low over the bluff, and the cattle were restless, shifting like they knew something unnatural was on its way. Inside the ranch house, the fire burned low and the man beside it didn't move much, hadn't for hours. He was a tall, quiet figure in his late 30s, shoulders heavy not with labor, but with time. He'd once had a name that people used freely, back when his wife was alive, and his boy still ran through the alfalfa fields in boots 2 sizes too big. But those names had been buried under frost, under town gossip, under years of silence. Now, when people mentioned him at all, it was with half-turned heads and words like loner, mourner, or the one who don't go to church no more. The storm crept in like guilt, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you stir at sounds that aren't there. Then came a knock. Not loud, not hurried, just wrong. No one knocked out here. Not this far. Not in the middle of a snowstorm. He rose slowly, boots scraping wood, and crossed to the door. Another knock, like a question asked twice. He opened it without a word. At first, he thought the wind had tricked him. But then he saw her. She stood just past the porch rail, a shape wrapped in tattered cloth and defiance. Her long black hair was soaked, sticking to her cheeks, her shoulders. She couldn't have been more than 19, 20 at the most. Her skin was raw from the cold, her fingers blue at the tips, and her eyes didn't blink. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't beg. She just stood there, barefoot, snow clinging to the hem of her dress like ghosts. He stepped aside. She hesitated, then took a half step, then stopped again. He realized she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the barn behind the house. Without a word, he turned, took a thick wool blanket from the wall hook, and walked past her toward the barn. The door creaked as he opened it, the smell of hay and saddle oil greeting them both. He knelt beside the stove, struck a match, and lit the small fire in the iron belly. He handed her the blanket, careful not to touch her hand. She wrapped it around her shoulders in a way that was almost ceremonial, like accepting it meant something. Maybe it did. She sat in the corner near the hay, close to the fire, arms tight around her knees. Her body trembled, but her eyes stayed strong. Proud, wounded but unwilling to bend. He stood for a moment, unsure of what he'd just invited into his life. Then he turned and walked back to the house. That night, the wind screamed like something wild and wrong. He sat near his fire, coat still on, staring at nothing. He thought of the stories his father used to tell, of men cursed by kindness, of neighbors turned to enemies by who they dared to shelter. He didn't know her tribe, didn't know her name, but he knew enough to guess that somewhere, someone was looking for her. And when they found out where she'd gone, it wouldn't be welcome news. Outside, the storm thickened. The barn groaned in the wind. He stood once to check on her, pausing at the door, but not going in. Through the cracks, he saw her silhouette near the stove, sitting still, the blanket curled around her like armor. He didn't sleep. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The sky was brittle and pale, and snow blanketed the earth like a hush. He stepped into the cold, his breath a slow cloud, and walked to the barn. She was gone. Blanket folded neatly. No footprints but hers, leading away from the barn toward the distant tree line. He followed them a few paces, then stopped. The snow softened her trail quick. Soon it had vanished. He stood there a long time, the sun climbing behind him. In his chest, something ached, not sharp, not sudden, just sore, like a wound healing wrong. By midday, the cattle were calm again, and the chores went on. He fixed a loose fence board, chopped wood for the stove, salted the porch steps. But he couldn't shake the look in her eyes. Not scared, not thankful, just bare. 3 days passed. He tried not to expect anything, but every time the wind shifted, or a crow flew low over the ridge, he looked up too fast. He wondered where she was sleeping now, what she was running from, and why that blanket, folded so carefully, felt heavier each time he passed it. The 4th morning, he was repairing a broken hinge on the barn when he found it. Tied to the post near the barn door was a single white feather, tucked with leather cord into a carved piece of bone shaped like a crescent moon. It hung still in the air, not swaying, as if it knew it was meant to be noticed. He took it down and turned it over in his hands. It wasn't a message. It was a sign. That night, he didn't eat. Just sat on the porch in the cold, the feather in his lap, remembering the way she had looked at the barn. Not like a refuge, but like a memory. He still didn't know her name, but something told him he would. And when he did, it would come with a price. The kind that doesn't take gold or blood, but something harder. A choice. One he'd have to make soon. Because men don't ride out this far unless they're looking for something. And someone somewhere was surely coming. The blanket sat draped across the back of his wooden chair for days, unmoving, untouched. Its edges curled and like it remembered her body. How it wrapped her. How she clung to it without begging. The rancher kept glancing at it, sometimes thinking to fold it again, sometimes thinking to burn it. But he didn't. He just let it rest there like it was watching him back. He hadn't spoken her name, because she hadn't given one. He hadn't asked where she came from, though deep down he feared he already knew. The white feather and crescent bone charm confirmed it. Navajo, most likely, and not far from here. The old tribes still moved quietly through the land. Their winter camps hugged the folds of riverbeds and hollows of the high desert. There had been peace for some time, but peace was always a brittle thing. It could be broken with something as small as a glance, a misstep, or a gesture misunderstood. And blankets held meaning. He woke the fourth morning to a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the barn or the slow creak of timber in the cold. Hooves. Many. Measured. Coming not fast, not frantic, but with intention. When he opened the door, the sky was heavy with low-hanging clouds again, and the air smelled like something waiting to begin. 5 riders approached from the ridgeline, dark figures moving in quiet formation. Not townfolk, not soldiers, Navajo men, painted horses, steady eyes. At their front was an older man with long silver hair braided with beads and rawhide. His posture was noble, his expression unreadable. The rancher didn't reach for his rifle. He simply stepped off the porch and waited. Not brave, just too tired to pretend fear would change anything. They dismounted in silence. One younger man stayed beside the horses, hand resting on the reins of all 5, as though to say, "We don't plan to stay long." The elder approached slowly, stopping at the fence. "You gave her the blanket," the old man said. It wasn't a question. The rancher didn't lie. He gave a slight nod. She accepted it. Again, not a question. "She came to us wrapped in it," the elder continued, his voice low and smooth. "She said nothing else, and we asked nothing more." The rancher tried to speak. Couldn't. His voice had gone dry in his throat. "In our way," the man said, "a blanket given in the cold, by a man to a woman, means one thing. It is not simple warmth. It is not pity. It is marriage." The word dropped like a stone in water. Marriage. He blinked. "I didn't know that." "It does not matter what you knew," the elder replied gently. "What matters is what she knew, and what she accepted." The rancher's gaze drifted to the barn. His hands felt suddenly too big, too clumsy. "I never touched her. I never even asked her name." The old man gave the faintest of nods. "Still, she is yours now by our law. No other man may claim her. She will not be given, sold, or traded. If you refuse her, she returns to no one." The other riders remained still. They weren't threatening him. They weren't cornering him. They were doing something worse. They were letting him decide. He swallowed. "She came barefoot," he murmured. "She was freezing. You wrapped her in your home," the elder said. "You stoked fire for her body, and you gave her that which carried your scent, your safety. It is no small thing." For a moment, the only sound was wind brushing through the dead grass. "She waits now," the elder finished, turning back toward his horse. "If you are her husband, you will come to her. If you are not, she must still never marry. That is our law." They left as quietly as they came. The rancher stood in the yard long after the sound of hooves faded. He hadn't moved. He hadn't asked questions. And he didn't know what he was supposed to feel. Indignation, shame, sorrow. But what he felt most was guilt. Not because he'd done something wrong, but because he had meant it in a way. When he gave her that blanket, he'd meant something. Not marriage, but maybe something more frightening. that he cared if she lived or died, that he didn't want her to feel the kind of cold he had felt since the grave took his wife. And maybe that's all it ever took to belong to someone. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat beside the fire, elbows on his knees, the blanket folded beside him like a verdict. He remembered how his wife once said blankets told stories. How, when their son was born, she wrapped him in a patchwork quilt made from pieces of both their childhood shirts. "This is what family means," she'd whispered. "Pieces sewn together with memory." Now here he was, sitting alone with a blanket that told a different story. A new one. One written in silence and snow. The next morning he saddled his horse. Didn't write a note. Didn't pack food. Just wrapped the blanket in oilcloth and rode toward the river, where the old people said the Navajo camped in winter. It was half a day's ride, the trail winding down past rock towers and through dry streambeds, now powdered white with snow. He didn't ride fast. He wasn't sure if he was going toward something or away from it. When he reached the clearing near the river, the camp revealed itself slowly. Low fires, rounded hogans, the faint sound of children's laughter, and smoke rising through cold, still air. The camp didn't stop at his arrival. No one ran to greet or challenge him, but many turned and watched. Then he saw her. She was kneeling near a pot, stirring something. Her hair was braided down her back now, adorned with a red ribbon. She wore a new dress, well new to him. It was dark blue, stitched with white lines along the sleeves and neck. She looked cleaner, stronger, but her eyes hadn't changed. She saw him, didn't flinch, didn't rise, just watched. He dismounted, carrying the bundle in both hands, walked toward her slowly, aware of dozens of eyes. His boots crunched the snow like breaking glass. He stopped a few paces from her. "I didn't know," he said, voice rough. She nodded, but said nothing. "I didn't mean it as. I didn't mean to ask for anything." Still she didn't speak. He held out the oilcloth-wrapped bundle. "I brought it back." At that she stood. Her hands were bare, small, but steady. She took the bundle from him, unwrapped it carefully, her fingers brushing against wool and memory. "I thought you were going to die," he said, barely above a whisper. "That's all." She looked up, and then finally spoke. "I did die." He blinked. "That night, part of me did," she said. "The part that believed no one would ever be kind without taking something in return." The words knocked the breath out of him more than any fist could have. "I didn't want marriage," she continued, "but I also didn't want to be owned. You gave warmth without a chain. That's why I kept it." Silence again. "Now they say I belong to you." "I don't want to own you," he said quickly. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not afraid." She stepped closer, holding the blanket between them like a treaty. Her voice softened. "I won't be sold. Not again. Not to a man, not to a name. But I will work. I will help. I will live somewhere that doesn't see me as a burden." He nodded. "I've got room. And work." Her eyes narrowed, not distrustfully, but sharply, like she was weighing something. "Then we start with that," she said. "Not a marriage. A shelter." He nodded again. She folded the blanket, then handed it back. "You gave it to me once," she said. "Now I give it back. When we are both ready, if we ever are, you can offer it again. And I'll choose, knowing all that it means." He took it, held it to his chest. For a moment, the river behind them cracked with the weight of thin ice splitting. That night, he slept near the camp, curled under a separate skin, alone but not unwanted. In the morning, she walked beside his horse on the way back, neither of them speaking much. They didn't need to. When they reached the ranch, she looked at the porch, the barn, the fields beyond. No awe, no hesitation, just a quiet nod. She walked to the barn and began gathering kindling like it had always been her home. And in the chair by the fire, the blanket waited again, folded, patient. But this time, it wasn't a symbol of confusion. It was a promise neither of them had broken. Not yet. The snow had softened by the time spring pressed its first shy fingers into the folds of the land. Not gone, just receding, like sorrow after a long silence. The rancher stood near the creek that marked the southern edge of his land, watching the way the water moved again, thin but alive. And that felt like something. Like hope, maybe. Or maybe he was just learning how to name things again. She had been at the ranch nearly 3 weeks, and she still hadn't unpacked all her belongings. There weren't many to begin with: a small pouch of dried herbs, a thin comb made of bone, and 2 carved sticks she placed above the barn window, like silent guardians. But it wasn't about what she brought. It was how she moved through the space. Quiet, careful, as if she wasn't sure yet whether she belonged or was merely being tolerated. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. But there were gestures. She would leave ash cakes near the stove after feeding the chickens. He'd see her brushing the horses before he rose from bed. Once, when his shoulder flared up from an old injury, he found a salve resting on the table, the lid tied with a piece of red ribbon. She never mentioned how she knew. The town had begun to notice, and not kindly. The general storekeeper gave him a longer pause when handing over sugar. A woman with 2 children turned her face when she passed by their wagon. Even the preacher, who once offered him his pew when he was grieving, now only offered thin smiles and side eyes. "You've taken in a woman from the tribes," one rancher said bluntly at the last supply run. "That won't sit well." The rancher didn't argue. He just packed the flour and left. She never asked how the town responded, but she must have known. People carry rejection like a scent. It follows, even in silence. One morning, she asked if she could walk down to the river. "I won't be long," she said, tying her braid with string. He nodded. "Need company?" "No," she said softly, "but thank you." She walked with the blanket folded over one arm. Not the same way she had before. Then it had been armor. Now it felt like a question she hadn't asked aloud. He let her go. But as the sun rose higher and the chores passed in slow, hollow movements, he kept glancing down the slope toward the willow tree near the bend in the water, the one with roots curled like fingers in prayer, where his wife used to sit and press her back against the bark, humming songs without words. He didn't follow until midday. She was there, as he knew she would be, kneeling at the base of the tree, her hands clasped around her knees. The blanket lay beside her. Her face was turned toward the current, but her eyes were somewhere else. He approached without noise, but she didn't startle. "You were right," she said, her voice steady. "About what?" "This land knows how to listen." He sat beside her in the grass, careful to leave a space between them. They both watched the river for a while. She broke the silence. "I wasn't supposed to come to your barn," she said. "I was meant to go north, toward my aunt's people. I had food, a direction, but I ran out of both when the storm hit." He didn't interrupt. "When I saw your barn light, I thought I'd found an empty place, just enough to survive the night. I didn't think anyone would be kind." She looked at him then. "I didn't think anyone would stay kind after seeing me." His jaw tensed, but he kept his voice low. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "The usual." He nodded, because he understood, not from the same path, but from pain that knows what it is to be looked through. "I wasn't sure you'd let me stay," she added. "I wasn't sure either," he replied, "but I didn't want the silence to win again." She turned back to the river. "They say the willow tree holds memory, that if you whisper into its bark, the roots carry it." He studied her face. There was no trace of a child left in her. Whatever had happened before the barn, before the storm, had burned through the last of that innocence. "Do you remember her?" she asked. His breath caught. "Yes." "Do you speak of her?" "No." "Why?" He stared at the water. "Because I'm afraid if I speak her name, it'll come out wrong. Too light, like smoke, and she deserves more weight than that." She closed her eyes. Then, without asking, she reached for the blanket, unfolded it, and draped half over her own shoulders. The other half she held open toward him. A gesture. No vow. No claim. Just space. He hesitated, then accepted it. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in the same warmth. Not as husband and wife, not yet even as friends, but as people who knew what it was to be left. She tilted her head toward him slightly. "My name is Atsa," she said. "It means eagle." He looked down at his hands. "I'm Matthew." She smiled just faintly. "You don't look like a bird." I don't feel like one. Another long pause. Are you afraid of what they say? She asked. The town. He considered it. I was. Now, I think I'm more afraid of becoming a man who listens to them. That earned him a nod. Not a reward, but an acknowledgement. They think I've bewitched you, she said. He smirked. You. She turned, mischief lighting her voice for the first time. I can't even cook beans right. Some which I'd be. They both laughed. It was soft, awkward laughter, the kind that breaks frost. Then her gaze fell, thoughtful again. Back in my old life, she said. I wasn't seen either. Just used. A tool to settle debts, a face to look good beside someone else's pride. They said I was lucky, but lucky doesn't bruise. He stayed quiet. She looked at the river again. When you gave me that blanket, you didn't see a price tag. You saw frostbite. You saw a girl with a face too proud to ask. He nodded. That's what I saw. I didn't take it as a husband's gift, she said, but I also didn't take it lightly. I know. You were the first man who gave me something that didn't hurt. That line stayed in the air a while. She turned toward him, face unreadable, but her voice low. If I wanted to leave, would you let me? He didn't flinch. Yes. If I stayed, would you make it a cage? No. She nodded. Then I think I'll stay, she said. Not because I'm yours, but because I feel more like myself here. He met her gaze. And that's all I want. They sat until the sun passed its highest point, the wind tugging at the edge of the blanket between them. She didn't draw it tighter. Neither did he. When they rose, they didn't speak. She folded the blanket again, placed it over her shoulder. Together, they walked back to the house. That evening, as he lit the lamp in the kitchen, he found her hanging herbs near the window, murmuring something low under her breath. A song, maybe. A prayer. Or perhaps she was just filling the room with something other than ghosts. Later, as he stepped outside to check the gates before bed, he looked back and saw her standing at the doorway, holding a bowl of stew. She didn't offer it with words, just held it out with both hands, waiting. He took it, and for the first time in months, the food tasted warm before it even touched his mouth. In the distance, the willows swayed, though no wind stirred, and something in him began to thaw, not all at once, but just enough to know that spring was coming. Not to the land, not to the cattle, but to him, and maybe to her too. They came just after sundown, as the last light bled over the ridge in long, rust-colored streaks. A cluster of riders, young men from town, rowdy with drink, spooked by whispers and clinging to the false courage of one another. Their laughter carried across the pasture before their shapes even broke the horizon, and Matthew knew, without needing to see their faces, what they had come for. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, shoulders still. He didn't reach for the rifle leaning near the door. Not yet. Some moments call not for thunder, but for restraint. Inside, Atsa stirred a pot on the stove, her movements slow and unbothered. But he knew she heard them too. She always heard what others missed, the subtle shifts in tone, the approaching change in wind. She didn't ask him what was happening. She simply set the ladle down and wiped her hands on her apron, calm as stone. They're coming to rattle their chains, he said quietly. She nodded once, then let them rattle. By the time the riders reached the fence, their voices had grown louder, cruder. Slurs, old ones sharpened by ignorance. One of them, Red Brannigan's son, tall and soft-eyed with a face too young for his cruelty, threw a rock toward the barn. It hit the door with a thud, not breaking anything, but marking intent. Matthew, another called, dragging out his name with mockery. You home, old friend? You got something in that barn don't belong to you. He stepped off the porch, walking slow toward the fence line. The men reined in, their horses stamping nervously, sensing the tension their riders couldn't name. Matthew's voice, when it came, was even. Turn back. We're just checking on you, the ringleader said, grinning too wide. Heard you married yourself a little Navajo prize. Thought maybe you forgot what side of the river you were born on. The others snorted, emboldened by the silence that followed. Another rock was thrown, this time toward the chicken coop. A clatter, the squawk of a hen. Behind him, the barn door creaked. Atsa stepped into the dusk, barefoot in the cold, her dress plain, her expression unreadable. The blanket hung over her shoulders like a shawl, edges trailing behind her like wind. She didn't speak. She didn't lift her chin or lower her eyes. She simply stood, still as stone, wrapped in silence that didn't beg or explain. And the men, for all their shouting, went quiet, because something about her presence unsettled them, not in the way a threat does, but in the way truth does, when it's too calm to argue with. Red Brannigan's boy muttered something about witches. Another urged they'd just made a joke. One tugged at his horse's reins, already backing away. Matthew didn't move, and Atsa stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "If you think I came here to steal something, you misunderstand me. I came to remember myself." She looked at them each, slow, steady. "I was given no choice in the past, but here I chose to stand, with a man who does not own me, with land that does not whisper lies. You can throw stones if you need to feel taller, but don't mistake my quiet for fear." The wind shifted. A fence post creaked, and one by one, the riders turned their horses, not in shame, perhaps not even in understanding, but in confusion, because they hadn't expected to be spoken to. Not like that, not without begging. When the last hoofbeat faded, the night fell thick around them. Matthew exhaled. Not relief, something heavier. "You didn't have to say anything," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied. "You've stood enough for others. Tonight, someone needed to stand for you." He looked at her then, not as a stranger, not as a burden or a guest, but as something more complex. A mirror, a storm that understood silence, because it had lived through it too. That night, she didn't return to the barn. She stayed in the house, folding blankets near the hearth. And when the fire dimmed low, he found her sewing again, two small birds taking shape in red thread on a square of muslin. "I dreamed of flight once," she murmured, not looking up. "Not the kind with wings. The kind where no one decides your name for you." He sat nearby, elbows on knees. "I dreamt of stillness," he said, "a place where grief didn't echo off every wall." She nodded. "Then maybe we both found what we weren't looking for." In the morning, they rode together, north, toward the tribe. It was her idea. "I want them to see," she said. "Not just here." He didn't ask what she meant. He trusted her rhythms now. The ride was long, quiet. The river shimmered beneath the sun, ice melting along the edges. When they reached the camp, the same elder who had once warned him now stood waiting, arms folded. She dismounted first. "I do not return in shame," she said. "I return with choice." The elder studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Then let the new blanket be sewn," he said. The next 2 days passed in preparation. No grand feasts, no drums. Just hands weaving, women murmuring, fires fed carefully. The ceremony was not loud. It didn't need to be. Atsa stepped forward, unwrapped the old blanket, the one from the barn, and placed it in Matthew's arms. "That was the warmth that saved me," she said. "But this will be the one we choose." She nodded to a young girl, who brought the new woven blanket, soft gray, threaded with red and blue lines. It was placed over their shoulders together, not as property, but as equal shelter. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise. But their silence held more truth than most vows. When they returned to the ranch, the porch held the morning sun in golden streaks. 2 birds sat on the fence, fluttering but not flying. Inside, the muslin square lay folded neatly on the table. He picked it up. The 2 birds, finished now, faced each other in red thread, surrounded by white space. "I never wanted to be rescued," she said behind him. "I know. I just wanted to feel safe when I slept." He turned. "Do you now?" She nodded. "Even in this broken place, you made a room for peace." They stood in the doorway as the wind swept across the field, neither moving. And though the fire inside the house burned low, its warmth lingered, because not every blaze comes with flame. Some fires burn beneath snow, quiet, unseen, until they rise in moments like this. Moments when a woman, once discarded, chooses to stand, and a man, once buried in grief, chooses not to turn away. And together, without force or fear. They learned that dignity can begin in silence. That love, real love, does not shout. It endures, like embers beneath winter, waiting until two hands find them again.